Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the windswept wilds of the Mongolian steppe, where the earth stretches wide and the sky seems to sit directly on your forehead. You can almost feel the hooves of a distant horse pounding a trail into the dry grass, pushing through the silence with the urgency of empire. There's dust in the air, and a sliver of parchment clutched in the rider's hand, a message from Genghis Khan himself. Perhaps meant for a general hundreds of miles away. And you're standing in the path of a galloping world power. This was a time when messages didn't beep, ping, or slide into inboxes. If you wanted someone to know something, you told a man on a horse to go ride until his legs gave out, or better yet, until the horses did. You probably wouldn't survive this job. Not without blistered hands, frozen toes, or possibly getting shot at by someone with a poor grasp of diplomacy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your city and local time in the comments, so I know where you're nodding off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the wide-open land of 13th century Mongolia. Wind whistles across endless plains, where Genghis Khan's empire began to sprawl like spilled ink on parchment. You're not here as a warrior or a noble. No, you're standing where something quieter, but just as powerful, once unfolded the creation of one of the most efficient postal networks the ancient world had ever seen. You blink against the dust and try to imagine the logistics. It wasn't just sending a letter to grandma. This was military intelligence, political control, diplomacy, taxation, supply chain management, and emergency response all rolled into one. Delivered by horse. The Mongols called it the yam, which sounds a bit like a tuber, but in reality was the backbone of an empire. It was a series of way stations, stocked with spare horses, food, fodder, and riders who didn't flinch when asked to cross 200 miles without stopping. Think of it as the Amazon Prime of the medieval world, except your package was often a war declaration. And your delivery window was before sunrise or else. And it all started here on hooves and grit and sheer ambition. Now, the steppe is not an easy place to build anything. No roads, no permanent towns, and not a Starbucks in sight. But that's also what made the Mongols so impressive. While the rest of the world struggled with mud and mailmen, Genghis looked out the horizon and thought, what if we could get word from one end of the empire to the other faster than anyone else? And unlike your group project partners, he actually followed through. You imagine that first generation of riders, not quite warriors, not quite monks. They weren't in it for glory or fortune. Well, not only they were the blood vessels in the circulatory system of an empire, pumping life into cities, borders, battlefields. One mainstream historical fact by the mid-13th century, this system stretched across nearly 200,000 miles, with thousands of relay stations, or urtus, scattered from China to Eastern Europe. Horses could be swapped out every 25-30 miles, and official messengers carried a special medallion called a jirage, which we'll talk more about in the next section. A quirky little tidbit. The word yam comes from the Turkic Mongol word for road or rote and not a vegetable. So no, the empire wasn't powered by root crops. And yet, historians still argue whether the yam system was inspired by earlier Chinese courier networks, Persian royal roads, or if Genghis truly dreamt it up independently while watching a gerbil run in a wheel. The reality is likely a mashup of ideas stitched together with Mongol ingenuity and the terrifying urgency of an emperor who really didn't like to be kept waiting. You reach down and scoop up a handful of the dry soil. Somewhere beneath it lies the hoofprint of a long-dead courier, possibly carrying news that changed a kingdom's fate. You imagine the weight of that responsibility, the loneliness, the endless horizon, the constant pressure to keep moving, no matter the cost. The wind picks up again. It carries with it whispers of names you don't recognize, towns that no longer exist, and orders written in a language long faded from the page. But the riders, their impact is still galloping through time. You might not feel the horse under you just yet, but you will. Don't worry, we'll saddle up soon enough. You're starting to hear the rhythm now, hoofbeats echoing through the vastness. Steady as a drum. Faint, but persistent. That's the heartbeat of the yam, pulsing across the Mongol Empire like an invisible river. You haven't moved your feet, but already you feel yourself riding alongside it, brushing past tufts of dry grass, beneath skies that never seem to end. Now, picture this: you're a messenger, a yamchi. You've just received a letter sealed by the Khan's personal stamp, and you're instructed to deliver it, say, 300 miles west. You're not expected to ride all that way on one horse, because that would be lunacy, and your horse would file a formal complaint. Instead, you're going to ride the arteries of the yam. This system wasn't a straight road. It was a chain of outposts, or ertus, spaced carefully across the land. Each outpost was stocked with what you needed: fresh horses, warm food, hay, spare tack, maybe a cup of fermented mare's milk if you were into that kind of thing. And most importantly, it was staffed by people who knew their job mattered. The brilliance of the yam was its simplicity. No fancy technology, no cryptic maps, just a line of stations every 25 to 30 miles or so, like beads in a necklace stretched across a continent. Each station was responsible for the land between itself and the next one. It was like passing a baton in the world's longest relay race with horses instead of spandex. Imagine trudging into a station at dusk. Your horse is steaming. Your coat is stiff with sweat and dust. The staff doesn't ask you where you're from or what's in your pouch. They know better. They already have a fresh horse saddled. The switch takes less than 5 minutes. You're off again before the sun can finish setting. A mainstream historical fact. This wasn't a tiny operation. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, there were more than 1 to 400 relay stations across the empire. Some sources say as many as 10,000 horses were reserved specifically for courier duty. That's right, an entire equine army just for delivering mail. And while you might think this was just a wartime convenience, it wasn't. This system carried everything from tax records to supply requests to friendly greetings between distant Mongol rulers. It was like a medieval version of Slack, only with more manure. Now here's something fringe. Some yam stations are rumored to have been built in caves or camouflaged into hillsides to avoid detection by enemies. Or more realistically, bandits who realized that intercepting the Khan's mail could be lucrative or lethal. And historians still argue whether the yam was purely a Mongol innovation, or whether it was modeled more directly on the Chinese Liao or Tang dynasty systems, which used similar relay-style routes centuries earlier. Was Genghis borrowing or building anew? Or did he just take what worked and make it terrifyingly efficient? That kind of blend is hard to untangle. You feel the press of history on your chest now, how real people, with sore legs and frozen hands, kept this entire operation moving. The relay system wasn't just for the elite. It depended on the peasants, herders, builders, and anonymous horse handlers who never saw a battlefield but quietly held the empire together. One hoofprint at a time. You glance down a long imaginary road, watching as a dust cloud approaches. Another rider, bent low, is coming in hard. He doesn't slow until the last possible second. The handoff is so smooth it barely counts as stopping. You blink, and he's gone again, already chasing the next horizon. This was the Yam, the silent, tireless pulse of a world that conquered not just by sword, but by speed. And tonight, you get to ride along. Just slow enough not to break a sweat. You mount up now, not in a hurry, just enough to feel the reins in your hands and the sway of the saddle under your thighs. The horse beneath you is alert, nostrils flared, as if it too senses the invisible urgency stitched into every journey across this vast land. You're shadowing a courier now, a Yamchi, lean as a whip, eyes sharp despite the endless miles. His cloak flaps behind him as he kicks into a gallop, hooves pounding over dirt, over frost-hardened grass, over the bones of forgotten warriors. The letter he carries is small, but its weight is measured in lives, not parchment. He doesn't ride with leisure. He rides like the empire depends on it because it does. If the Khan demands an answer before dawn, then dawn is when that letter will arrive. Even if the horse doesn't. Relay riders like him never rest. At least, not properly. Their rest is the space between exhalations, between one gallop and the next. They sleep on horseback. They eat in transit. They dream, if at all, with one eye open. The Mongol postal system had something no other empire of its time quite mastered: speed. Unrelenting, coordinated, and often terrifying speed. These couriers could cover 200 to 250 miles a day, easily outpacing European messengers by centuries. Yes, centuries. European systems of the same period were still relying on find a guy you trust and hope he doesn't die. And here you are, watching a man change horses midnight, in the dark, under stars that look closer than usual. At each two, the process is swift. No tea, no small talk, just a whistle, a trade, and a thud of hooves leaving once more. There's discipline here, a tempo you can't help but respect. The writer doesn't care about the contents of the message. It could be a death sentence. It could be a birthday greeting. Doesn't matter. What matters is the delivery. Here's your quirky fact for this leg of the journey. The riders were so feared and respected that some villages along the routes were required to provide horses, food, and shelter on demand, whether they liked it or not. Refusal could bring the wrath of the Khan. Imagine DoorDash showing up and threatening to raze your town if you don't hand over your best noodles. Now, historians still argue whether these couriers were military men or a distinct class entirely. Some say they were pulled from trusted warrior ranks. Others argue they were trained from youth, given special education, language skills, and tested for endurance before entering service. Perhaps it was both another example of Mongol pragmatism trumping rigid class structures. You ride a little further now. The air grows colder, thinner. This route curves gently toward a low range of hills, and your courier's silhouette blurs against the rising moon. He doesn't pause. He can't afford to. Somewhere beyond that ridge, another rider is waiting to take his place. You imagine the transfer quick, silent. The new man mounts, checks the saddle, and disappears into the dark. This way, a message can travel continuously, even through the night, without stopping for meals or muscle cramps. The brilliance wasn't in how fast one man could go. It was how fast all of them could work together. A system that turned human limitation into collective momentum. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were broken legs, horses, and humans both. Wolves, bandits, river crossings during flood season. But the system accounted for this. Riders often traveled in pairs, carried weapons, and knew the terrain better than most military scouts. They weren't invincible, but they were a nightmare to catch. Some records even suggest messengers carried code phrases or disguised orders, so that if intercepted, the information was useless without context. A form of medieval encryption, delivered on horseback. You smirk. The NSA would have loved these guys. You lean back a little now. The sound of hoofbeats fades into a steady thrum like a heartbeat. Steady and slow. You picture the miles unwinding beneath you like a great ribbon tied loosely across the world. You're not racing. You're gliding. The courier you follow is just one thread in a massive tapestry, and you can feel the pattern now. How every rider connects to another. How the system doesn't pause for sleep or weather or doubt. It just keeps going. And you're just along for the ride. The wind shifts as you ride, brushing across your face like the soft edge of parchment. Crisp with distance. Ahead, the courier reins in his mount not out of fatigue, but because he's approaching something important. He reaches into a leather pouch and pulls out a thin slab of silvered metal, etched with symbols and polished to catch even the faintest torchlight. He holds it up, and just like that, the gates open. This isn't magic. It's a jurage. Now, before you picture some oversized Game of Thrones prop, let's clarify a jurage was a medallion or tablet, typically crafted from precious metals, sometimes bronze, sometimes silver, carried by official messengers of the Mongol Empire. It wasn't decorative. It was authority, condensed into something you could hang around your neck. When a courier arrived at a station or passed through a guarded checkpoint, flashing this pass told everyone involved. Step aside. This message moves faster than your opinion. Think of it as a passport, a police badge, and a royal decree all rolled into one shiny rectangle. You duck your head slightly as the courier rides past the checkpoint, greeted not with ceremony but with a sort of practiced deference. No one questions a man carrying a jurege, not unless they have a death wish. Mainstream fact, these medallions weren't just symbols. They granted tangible rights such as the ability to requisition horses, demand supplies, and receive lodging wherever necessary. Some even came with inscribed commands, directly from the Khan, stating that disobeying the bearer was equivalent to disobeying the great Khan himself, which is not advisable. You glance at the medallion again. It catches the moonlight, cool and indifferent, like the empire that forged it. But here's the quirky twist: the garage wasn't just used by couriers. Foreign ambassadors, envoys, and even merchants granted special favor could receive one. There are records of garage-bearing travelers from Persia, Russia, and even Europe who used these passes to traverse thousands of miles safely through Mongol territory. In one colorful anecdote, a European missionary allegedly flashed his garage and walked straight through a military camp that would have otherwise skewered him on sight. It was the medieval equivalent of holding up an "I'm with him" sign at a biker rally. Still, historians argue over the standardization of the garage. Were they all the same size? Did different ranks receive different medals or markings? Some claim there were strict tiers: gold for the highest-ranking envoys, iron or bronze for mid-level couriers. Others suggest that the real power lay not in the tablet itself, but in who gave it to you. You shift in your saddle. The night is cooling fast, and the road feels longer than before. But you keep watching the courier. Every move he makes is efficient, as if the Jireg didn't just open doors, but etched expectations into his very bones. Speed, discipline, silence. He doesn't wave it around or show it off. That would be a rookie mistake. Instead, he lets it flash once, with precision just enough for the station guards to nod and step aside. Then it disappears back into the folds of his cloak, tucked away until the next checkpoint. You imagine how powerful it must have felt, riding through hostile lands with nothing but a slip of metal that screamed, "I'm allowed to be here." How many lives did that little object save? How many cities did it allow riders to pass through untouched at the same time? It's a reminder the Mongol Empire wasn't held together by brute force alone. It was held by structure, by protocol, and by a deep, almost paranoid respect for the chain of command. The Girej wasn't just a key, it was a reminder that you were a part of something bigger. Much bigger. You reach the next station. The handoff is smooth. Another horse is ready. The courier swings onto the new saddle in one practiced motion. But before he disappears into the dark again, he glances once more at the metal tablet in his hand, rubs it once for luck, and tucks it close to his chest. And then he's gone. Just like that. No words, no fanfare, just hoofbeats and a glint of silver disappearing into the night. You take a deep breath. It smells like leather, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of history. Not the most glamorous perfume, but it gets the message across. You're still riding slowly now. Not because you're tired, but because you've entered one of the Urtus, a relay station. And unlike the windswept openness of the steppe, this place feels busy, not bustling. Exactly nothing bustles in the middle of nowhere, but purposeful. Quiet hands tending to noisy horses, bowls clinking in the background. A hearth, barely glowing, with something questionable simmering in it. This is where the unglamorous magic happens. The courier dismounts, stiff-legged, and hands the reins to a stable boy without saying a word. Within moments, a fresh mount is led forward, already saddled and steaming from the nose. You're impressed. This station is clearly well run. Someone here knows how to handle logistics, probably a local who didn't expect to become an imperial warehouse manager, but did anyway because Genghis said, "It's your job now." Each of these stations had to be stocked daily, not seasonally. That meant fresh fodder, water, saddle gear, winter blankets, and yes, food for humans too. The couriers needed something warm in their stomachs, even if they didn't have time to chew it properly. A mainstream fact. Historians estimate that for every two, about 30 to 40 horses were maintained, often with rotational grazing and backup livestock in case of sickness or theft. Multiply that by over 400 stations, and you begin to realize the Mongols didn't just conquer territory. They tamed an entire continent's worth of supply chain headaches. You walk into the station's main shelter. It's built from wood and felt low to the ground to keep out the wind. Inside, there are bowls of soup, thin, salty, probably goat-based, hard cheese, dried meat, and something that looks like boiled leather but smells like garlic. You decide not to ask. Here's your quirky bit. Some reports suggest the stations even stored straw boots for riders to swap into when the weather turned bad. Yes, straw boots. Not great for fashion, but surprisingly warm and easily replaceable. Mongol innovation was never about luxury. It was about surviving long enough to get the job done. The courier doesn't linger. He gulps something steaming, tosses the bowl aside, and swings onto the new horse with all the ceremony of a man changing chairs. He's gone before his soup hits the ground. The station master, meanwhile, is already turning to a young assistant, pointing at supplies, muttering numbers. You catch only fragments, enough to know that they're tracking inventory like their lives depend on it. Because they probably do. Still, historians argue whether these stations were built by local conscripts, prisoners of war, or paid labor. Some sources suggest wealthy families along the route were obligated to maintain them, essentially subsidizing the empire's infrastructure. Others say it was a formal job assigned, inspected, and rotated like military service. Whatever the truth, it worked. You imagine how stressful it must have been to run one of these outposts during peak courier traffic. Horses in, horses out, requests from the capital, a letter from some half-drunk general demanding more fermented milk because he's cold in Bukhara. The yam wasn't a machine. It was people tired, gritty, underfed people who somehow kept it all together. You wander to the edge of the compound. The sun is rising now barely, like it's also too tired to start the day. You watch a small group of herders bring in more horses, lean and quick, the kind that know they're not here for pasture, they're here for work. A rooster crows. Somewhere. Someone sneezes. It's morning at the Mongol post office. You think about your own post office now. Fluorescent lights, long lines, the smell of tape and disillusionment. Here everything smells like earth and urgency. There's no line. There's just momentum. The sense that something is always in motion even if it's just around the corner. The station hums with quiet purpose. You feel that this entire empire of invisible hands, feeding the horses, counting supplies, swapping saddles, folding maps, boiling water. No one's chasing glory here. They're just making sure the message gets through. And that is oddly comforting. You barely had time to blink before the courier was gone again, swallowed by the distance. But this time, you notice something different. The terrain is shifting, the ground hardens underfoot, the grass thins out, and ahead, jagged shapes claw at the sky. Mountains. The path winds upward now slowly, stubbornly as if trying to resist what's coming. But the courier doesn't hesitate. His horse tenses beneath him, nostrils flaring at the sharp incline. But there's no pause. just grit and hoofbeats. Again, you follow closely, and as the slope grows steeper, the world gets quieter. Snow hugs the ridgelines like white scars, and the wind slices instead of whispers. This is where the yam becomes less relay and more test of survival. The Mongol postal system wasn't confined to soft plains and sunny skies. It sliced across deserts, forests, swamps, and yes, mountains. Treacherous ones. The Altai, the Tian Shan, the Hindu Kush. Places where even goats think twice. And the mail still had to get through. Mainstream fact. The Yam network included specialized mountain routes, many of which were only passable during certain months. Some were marked with primitive cairns, others with carved symbols, but many relied solely on memory and guts. The couriers riding them weren't just delivery men, they were scouts, climbers, survivalists. You watch as the path narrows to barely a horse's width. One wrong step, and it's a 1,000-foot plummet into oblivion. No pressure, and here's your quirky tidbit. Some riders reportedly traveled with their own portable felt tents. Tiny jeers they could pitch at night during snowstorms. Imagine being in a tent the size of a refrigerator while wolves sniff around outside. Sleep well. You reach a narrow pass. The snow here hasn't fully melted, and the wind carries an eerie howl like the mountains themselves are gossiping. The courier tightens his cloak, adjusts the saddle straps, and keeps moving. You, wisely, stay behind the horse, just in case it slips first. At a bend in the trail, you find an old shelter built into the rock face. It's low and dark, more cave than cabin, but it was once a functioning ortu, a relay station disguised by the landscape. Scholars believe some mountainous posts were semi-secret, known only to elite couriers and hidden from enemy scouts. Kind of like a spy-safe house, but with more icicles and fewer martinis. And yet, historians still argue whether these remote relay posts were permanent or seasonal. Some say they were staffed year-round by rotating crews. Others believe they were temporary shelters maintained only during strategic campaigns. The truth? Probably both, depending on the terrain, the threat level, and how many times someone slipped on the same frozen ledge. The courier stops to water his horse. You take a moment to look around. The view is devastatingly beautiful. Icy peaks stretching like the backs of sleeping dragons. Silence so pure you're afraid to breathe too loudly. Somewhere down in that valley, a different courier rides east with news of a grain shortage. Somewhere beyond those cliffs, another heads west with orders for a siege. And here you are, in between it all. It's easy to forget how fragile the system was. How much depended on weather, on horses not breaking legs, on humans not breaking spirits. And yet, against all odds, this thing worked because it had to. The Khan didn't want excuses, he wanted results. You wrap your imaginary cloak tighter, the temperature's dropping fast, and your fingers feel numb just watching. The courier shifts in his saddle. There's a hard glint in his eye, not fear, but focus. He's almost at the top. From there, it's all downhill. Literally. And if the horse's joints hold out, figuratively, you start to descend slowly, watching the courier as he threads his way between loose rocks and icy patches. Each step is careful but swift. He's done this before. When you reach the valley floor again, it's like someone exhaled. The snow fades, the wind softens, the air smells like pine and wet earth. You made it. You glance back at the mountains. They stand tall, unmoved, unimpressed. But you followed the Yam through a place most would never even dare to climb. You've earned a warm meal and a dry pair of socks. Neither is coming, of course. But still, it's the thought that counts. The mountains fall behind you now, receding like half-remembered dreams. Your legs ache just from imagining the descent, but the courier presses on, and so do you, rolling down into greener lands where the air feels heavier, warmer, and filled with something unexpected. Voices. Not loud, not chaotic, just different. Accents you don't recognize. Colors that aren't steppe browns and grays, but bold cloth and intricate silks. This isn't Mongolia anymore. Not exactly. You've reached the edge of a Khanate. After Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire didn't collapse, at least not right away. Instead, it expanded, stretched, splintered. His sons and grandsons carved it into pieces, like a massive pie nobody could finish alone. The Yam system, too, was inherited by the Golden Horde in the west, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and, of course, the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan. But unlike other legacies, this one wasn't buried in a tomb. It kept galloping. Mainstream fact: Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, greatly expanded the Yam in China. He even merged elements of it with existing Chinese courier networks, creating a hybrid system that could deliver orders from Beijing to Vietnam in a matter of weeks. Some records suggest over 20,000 stations during his reign, dwarfing his grandfather's original infrastructure. You pass through a checkpoint now, manned by guards who look Mongol, but not quite. Their armor bears Persian etchings. One has a Turkish-style saber. Another wears a silk sash you're pretty sure came from Samarkand. This is what the Yam became: an empire of connections, spanning from the Korean peninsula to the Danube River, and the courier still flashing his jirej, still riding fresh horses, still carrying messages from capital to border and back again. But here's your quirky historical tidbit in some regions. Local Khans began customizing their Yam systems. They issued their own jirejis, built stations with domed roofs, and even altered the cuisine at the posts. So if you were lucky, a long ride might mean switching from dried goat to flatbread and dates. Not a bad trade. Still, historians argue whether these regional Yam networks were truly interoperable. Did a courier from the Ilkhanate use the same rules in Yuan China? Were there shared standards? Some say yes, pointing to uniform messenger codes. Others believe it was more chaotic, a patchwork quilt, stitched together with political favors and mutual distrust. You ride beside the courier now as he enters a bustling town, not a city, but clearly a trade hub. You smell spices, dust, horse sweat, and something sweet you can't identify. Here, the Yam Post is a formal building, with tiled roofs and an actual written ledger. Inside, clerks sit cross-legged, recording arrivals and departures, weighing parcels with hanging scales. One leans over a low desk, scratching a message in Persian script. Another reads from a scroll in Chinese. You spot a garage glinting from one man's sash. Different design, but same purpose. It's astonishing. a single postal culture has splintered across 4 massive khanats, each adjusting the recipe but keeping the core ingredients: horses, riders, stations, orders. The courier switches horses again. The fresh mount looks sleek Persian breed, perhaps faster but more fragile than the stocky Mongol ones from before. He doesn't pause to admire it, just rides. You follow as he weaves through town, past a group of foreign merchants arguing over silver weights, past a caravan unloading silk, past a beggar with a wooden flute who stops playing just long enough to nod at the rushing figure with the stamped pouch. There's respect here, even far from the central steppe. The yam still holds weight. You cross a bridge now, watching the water sparkle with 1,000 stories. Somewhere upstream, a warlord is receiving news of a betrayal. Downstream, a marriage proposal inches toward a princess. And here in the middle, you're watching it all pass by carried on hooves, sealed in wax, protected by a piece of engraved metal. You can almost hear it humming beneath you, the system, the structure, the slow churn of communication. It's not glamorous, not loud, but it holds an empire together in ways swords never could. The courier rounds a bend, and just before vanishing from view, you spot another rider waiting saddle ready. Scroll in hand, eyes fixed forward. Another day, another message, another stretch of road, and so it continues. You trail behind the courier now as he vanishes into yet another stretch of emptiness. Not wilderness exactly, but space, room, breathing distance between cities and camps. These miles are less about terrain and more about time. Time to think. Time to wonder what's in the pouch bouncing against the courier's side. What is in there? You've followed this journey for days now through dust, snow, soup, and saddle, and you haven't peeked once. But now your curiosity gets the better of you. So you sidle closer, eyeing the leather satchel that hasn't left the courier's hip since you started riding. It's sealed, of course, because trust is good, but wax seals and broken fingers are better. Still, let's talk about what might be inside. Mainstream fact. The Mongol postal system transported a stunning range of materials, not just military orders. Yes, of course, top generals and the great Khan himself issued commands through this network. But the yam also carried trade documents, census results, diplomatic missives, tax records, even royal decrees written in up to 5 languages depending on the region. Imagine that. One scroll Mongolian, Chinese, Arabic, Uyghur script, and maybe Latin if it was meant for a European envoy. That's not communication, that's a bureaucratic power flex. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. The yam didn't just carry official messages. According to some sources, gossip often traveled just as fast. Envoys returning from courts abroad would relay not only agreements and signatures, but also whispers of scandal, marriage negotiations, or who insulted whose ceremonial headdress. Diplomacy with a dash of drama. You picture a message being read by a noblewoman in Karakoram. His Highness of the Ilkhanate formally requests grain aid. And, by the way, his second wife has run off with a falconer. The 13th century version of spilling tea. Of course, not every letter was meant to be read by multiple eyes. Many were encrypted, written in cipher, encoded with symbols only a select few could understand. Some were wrapped so tightly in fabric and wax that trying to open them meant destroying the message itself. Historians still argue how widespread this secrecy was. Some suggest only the highest level communications were encrypted. Others believe the Mongols developed a sophisticated tiered classification system. It's not well documented, probably because it wasn't supposed to be. You pass another courier now, heading in the opposite direction. He nods once, expression unreadable. His pouch looks identical. For all you know, he's carrying poetry or instructions to burn a town to the ground. There's no way to tell. That's the haunting beauty of it all. Messages like these, fast, silent, sacred, meant decisions could be made before enemies knew they were in danger. Genghis Khan used this system to outmaneuver armies by days, even weeks. A letter dispatched at midnight could set an ambush in motion by sunrise. You begin to grasp how terrifying that must have been for anyone trying to oppose the Mongols. It wasn't just that their army was massive, it was that their information moved faster than yours ever could. But here's something even stranger. Archaeological digs in former relay stations have unearthed remnants of more domestic letters, lists, inventories, even what might have been romantic notes. Some historians believe high-ranking families used the yam not just for statecraft, but for personal affairs. You imagine a daughter writing to her father hundreds of miles away. The yaks are healthy. The well has frozen again. Mother is still upset about the rug. Delivered with the same care as a war command. Because in the Mongol Empire, everything was empire business. The courier adjusts his saddlebag, checking the straps. Not out of vanity, but to make sure the message isn't jostling. These letters are treated with reverence, like fragile fire. A single mistake, a torn scroll, a soaked pouch could lead to confusion, delay, even death. And you're wondering what it feels like to carry words that might shift the fate of nations. Or, at the very least, reschedule a meeting between two minor lords with very large hats. Your own thoughts begin to drift now, mirroring the road. What messages have been lost? What scrolls fell during river crossings or were stolen by bandits? How many orders never reached their destination? And what history might have changed because of it? The pouch remains closed, sealed, quiet. You'll never know exactly what's inside. But that's part of the wonder, isn't it? The sun is high now, hanging over the dusty plains like a bored sentry. You squint against the glare, still following the courier as he urges his horse forward, though slower now. The animal's sides heave. Its legs flick dust from the road in tired rhythm. The next station can't be far, but before it arrives, your thoughts drift into darker territory. Not every courier was as disciplined, fast, or lucky as the one you've been shadowing. Sometimes the mail didn't get through, and when that happened, well, that's where the Mongol sense of accountability came in. And by accountability, we mean creative punishment. Mainstream fact, the Mongol Empire was famously strict about delays in the postal system. If you were responsible for slowing a message, whether by laziness, sabotage, or simply falling asleep when you shouldn't, you weren't just reprimanded. You were punished. Publicly. Sometimes inventively. And sometimes, yes, fatally. There are records of postmasters being executed for missing delivery targets. Not a fine. Not a warning. Executed. Because when Genghis Khan said by sunset, he meant it. Time was power, and wasting it was treason. You try to imagine the pressure. Your horse breaks a leg. That's a full-blown crisis. A storm floods the trail. You ride through it. Bandits attack. You'd better dodge arrows and still make your connection. The yam didn't run on hope. It ran on fear, respect, and a very tight schedule. Here's your quirky tidbit. One legend claims that a courier who failed a critical delivery was sewn into a horse carcass and left in the sun as a warning to others. Is that true? Hard to say. Mongol sources didn't exactly include a section for HR policy. But what we do know is that dereliction of duty was taken extremely seriously. And not just for couriers. Relay station staff, horse tenders, even kitchen hands could face punishment if a message was delayed and someone traced the problem back to their post. Historians still argue over whether this culture of fear made the system stronger or more brittle. Did it encourage excellence or paranoia? Did it foster loyalty or simply obedience? The answer may depend on whether you were the one delivering the message or receiving the consequences. As you near the next station, you sense something's off. There's a nervous tension in the air, less activity, fewer hands at the ready. The gates are open, but no one rushes to meet the incoming courier. A single horse stands in the yard, chewing idly. The station master appears, wiping his hands on his robe. He bows low, eyes darting to the sealed satchel. The courier doesn't dismount. He leans down, mutters something you can't hear, and holds up his gurege like a silent accusation. It turns out the rider ahead of him missed his connection here. The fresh horse wasn't ready. The next courier had already left. Precious minutes, maybe hours lost. You don't have to hear what's being said to know someone's about to have a very long day. You turn your gaze away as the courier finally swings down, his movements stiff with restrained fury. He throws a glance at the stable hand, then marches toward the records tent to report the delay. His horse gets water. He does not. You linger in the yard. The station workers move around you with forced calm like actors in a play where the wrong line gets you fired into the sun. Still, despite the harsh consequences, the yam system endured. Maybe even because of them. Everyone understood the stakes. The message came first. Comfort. Excuses. Rest all secondary. You remember how your own post office handles delays. A shrug. A rain check. A politely worded email. Here a delay meant warships might sail at the wrong hour. A garrison might fall without support, or a city might open its gates to the wrong flag. The pressure could crush a lesser empire. But for the Mongols, it was how they held everything together, one gallop at a time, one message at a time, one extremely motivated rider at a time. And as you walk past the sweating horse, the faint scent of blood and dust in your nose, you understand something clearly. This wasn't just a job. It was a duty. And failure wasn't a setback. It was a sentence. You leave the tense stillness of that last station behind. Grateful the air is moving again. The courier is back in the saddle, now with a sharper edge to his riding, his jaw tighter, his eyes flicking toward the horizon like he's not just delivering a message anymore, but proving something. But here's the thing, not every rider galloping across the steppe was who they claimed to be. You glance sideways now, uneasy. There's another figure just ahead. A rider, same uniform, same gear. But he's not taking the usual path. He veers, pauses, seems to watch the shadows too closely. You can't quite place it, but something's off. Welcome to the shadow side of the Yum. Because beneath the clean lines of the official courier system, there was another layer, a darker one. Intelligence, espionage, surveillance. You're not just following messengers now. You're brushing shoulders with spies. Mainstream fact: the Mongol Empire didn't survive on cavalry alone. It thrived on information. Scouts rode ahead of armies, but so did intelligence gatherers, often disguised as merchants, monks, or even couriers. Some use the Yam system to quietly gather data, observe enemy movements, or deliver coded reports to commanders far away. These weren't assassins or saboteurs, not usually. Their job was subtler, to know things, and to pass them on faster than anyone else could. The courier in front of you slows unexpectedly at a fork in the road. He scans both routes, then rides left off the designated Yam trail. Interesting. You follow cautiously. After about a mile, he reaches a small station not on your map. The outpost is unmarked, nearly hidden behind trees. Its guards don't wear standard colors. You found a shadow station. These were rare, strategically placed posts used by covert operatives. Not for standard messages, but for sensitive ones. Hidden military orders, reports on rebellions, even intercepted messages from enemy couriers. Historians still argue whether this network was officially part of the Yam or a parallel structure developed by the intelligence branch of the empire. Some say Genghis Khan himself set it up during his early campaigns to test loyalty among his commanders. Your quirky fact for this section: there are whispered accounts of messages being written on silk slips and sewn into the lining of couriers' coats. That way, even if caught, they'd be searched and released unless someone knew where to look. Lightweight? Fireproof? Practically invisible. The Mongols thought of everything. Back at the hidden post, the courier doesn't dismount. He hands something off small, unmarked. The exchange is quiet. Practiced. He doesn't wait for acknowledgement. Just wheels his horse around and gallops off like he was never there. You start to notice now how often the lines blur. A merchant with a garage might also be scouting for weak city walls. A courier delivering troop orders might be carrying a second message written in invisible ink or a false pouch sewn into his saddle. It's a world of riders and watchers, speed and silence. But here's what truly makes your skin crawl. Some of the couriers weren't even real messengers. They were decoys, set loose to mislead enemies, to bait spies, or to deliver fake orders that would be intercepted and believed. And when caught, they sometimes didn't even resist because their capture was the plan. The Yam wasn't just a highway of horses, it was a chessboard. And every rider was a piece. You reach a main road again and rejoin the trail. The landscape opens, but your sense of unease lingers. How many messages were lies? How many were never meant to arrive? And how many were read by the wrong eyes? Even the seemingly innocent courier you've been following, do you know who sent him? What's actually in that pouch? What station it will really end up at? There's no way to be sure. You ride on, trying not to stare too hard at the next courier you pass. He nods, polite, but his eyes, they study you a second too long. It's a reminder. In Genghis Khan's empire, speed was only part of the story. The other part was knowing who controlled the flow of information and what they chose to send. You tighten your grip on the reins. The trail stretches forward, unmarked. Messages race through it truths, lies, secrets, threats, all carried by riders whose names are long forgotten. But their shadows still ride. The wind has picked up again, not cold, just constant. You feel it brushing against your neck like breath. The courier ahead is pushing his mount harder now, moving not like a man on an errand, but like a thread being pulled through the fabric of war. Because the yam wasn't only built for messages, it was built for movement. You start to notice the sign's deep ruts in the ground, scorched patches of soil, a trail wider than most. This isn't just the path of a single courier. This is the ghost of an army. Mainstream fact, the Mongol postal system was deeply intertwined with the Mongol military machine. The same network of roads and relay stations that carried orders also helped move troops, supplies, siege weapons, and reinforcements. It wasn't just a mail service, it was a weapon. Genghis Khan understood something long before most other empires did. The war isn't won when the swords clash, it's won when the information moves faster than the enemy can react. The yam system meant that while an opposing army was still waiting on scouts to return, the Mongols were already attacking. Orders could be sent from the capital to a frontline commander in days, not weeks. Fresh troops could be rerouted mid-march, and wounded soldiers could be reported and replaced before their blood dried. You pass a weathered stone marker now, half buried in grass. It marks a former supply depot once part of the network, now just a resting place for lizards and memories. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some couriers were ordered to carry extra horseshoes in their saddlebags, miniature supply kits to be handed off to advancing cavalry. That's how close the coordination was. The yam wasn't just a delivery system, it was the Mongol version of battlefield logistics. Mobile blacksmithing, route management, and resupply all in one fast-moving line. You ride through what was once a major campaign route. The ghosts of war hang lightly here, not in screams, but in echoes. Hooves, hammering, the metallic cough of sword being sharpened, and over all of it a scroll being passed from one hand to another, too quietly to be noticed. Historians still argue whether the yam was a military project first, or if it simply became militarized over time. Some claim Genghis Khan had the foresight to build it as a strategic backbone from the start. Others suggest it was originally meant for administration, but war turned it into something sharper, more dangerous. Either way, it worked. Mongol commanders rarely fought blind. They knew terrain. They knew troop strength. They knew who had betrayed them before the betrayers even finished packing. And if something went wrong, the system adapted. Horses were rerouted. Messages carried by multiple couriers simultaneously like arrows loosed from different bows, all aimed at the same target. You reach a fork in the road. One path winds toward a village, the other toward open steppe. The courier hesitates for a split second, just enough to make you wonder which direction holds the greater urgency. He goes right, toward the village. You follow, and as the sun sinks lower, a small outpost comes into view. Wooden palisades, torch smoke rising, a signal flag fluttering lazily in the wind. This is a garrison post, not just a relay. Here, horses and weapons are stored together. Riders aren't the only ones. Training soldiers drill in the yard, and the blacksmith's hammer rings like a clock. The yam and the military never existed separately. One carried the blade, the other knew where to strike. Your horse's hooves echo on the hard-packed earth as you circle the compound. You can feel it now how deeply this system was built into every part of the empire, like roots, like veins, like a nervous system reacting instantly to every pain, every twitch, every opportunity. The courier delivers his scroll to a young officer, who unseals it with practiced fingers. His face doesn't change, but the barked orders that follow send 2 riders sprinting for the stables. You don't know what the message said. You don't need to. What matters is that it arrived, and that someone moves because of it. So you ride on, knowing now that every hoofbeat carries more than just words. It carries momentum, the kind that topples cities before their gates even open, the kind that wins wars without swinging a sword. You're back on the open steppe now, where the sky feels like a ceiling made of silence, and the earth rolls endlessly beneath your horse's hooves. The courier presses forward again, and as you follow, you begin to wonder, how did they keep track of all this? Thousands of miles, dozens of languages, horses that needed feeding, couriers that needed rest, scrolls that couldn't be lost. This wasn't just speed. It was logistics on a scale few empires have ever managed, even with satellites and spreadsheets. Mainstream fact, the Mongols kept detailed records of yam outposts. There were ledgers for horses, lists of available supplies, logs of incoming and outgoing riders, and schedules pinned not to hours but to terrain. They calculated travel times by weather, daylight, and the average endurance of a trained horse, then adjusted seasonally. Winter slowed things. Summer made it faster, and if a road became impassable, reroute, relay, reinforce. Each Urtu acted like a checkpoint in a massive relay grid, and in some places, relay riders signed in either by name or with recognizable marks, depending on literacy levels. Messages weren't just handed over blindly, they were logged, verified, double counted. You think bureaucracy is boring now. Try doing it on a cliff in a snowstorm with a goat chewing on your inkwell. You pass a post now where a scribe sits under a shade cloth, tallying supplies with a bone stylus on strips of bark. The smell of ink mixes with hay and sweat. A young boy fetches clean water. A woman untangles a spare bridle. The whole thing hums with calm repetition. Quirky fact. Some relay stations used colored flags or smoke signals to indicate readiness, delays, or danger. Think of it as an early form of the do not disturb sign, except instead of annoying hotel guests, you're trying to avoid being trampled by a war courier galloping in at 40 mm. But this system couldn't run forever without breaking. The biggest problem: too much success. As the Mongol Empire ballooned, the demand on the yam system exploded. More messages, more riders, more horses. The network that once ran smoothly began to strain, especially at the outer edges, where local administrators had different priorities or occasionally zero interest in doing things the Mongol way. Historians still argue about how much central oversight the yam system had in its later years. Was there a top-down administrator tracking every route? Or did the system function more like a self-regulating hive, each region adjusting on the fly? Some scholars point to official decrees from Kublai Khan enforcing strict yam protocol, while others suggest large stretches of the network were essentially freelance by the 14th century. You pass a crossroads marked by a weathered signpost, languages carved into every face: Mongolian, Persian, Chinese, Tibetan, all pointing different directions. The yam was a logistical octopus. each arm wriggling independently, but somehow still attached to the same hungry brain. And then you find something strange. The road forks again, but here the left trail is overgrown. No hoofprints, no flags, no smoke, just wind and weeds. An abandoned relay line? You dismount. Curious. The old post is still there barely. A few sagging beams, a dry well, an overturned feed trough. This station hasn't seen a rider in years, maybe decades. You kneel by a scorched post where the ledger hut used to be. Under a stone, you find a rusted metal hinge, the kind used on a garage box. Forgotten authority. You wonder what caused the collapse. A war? A change in trade routes? Maybe a station master who fell asleep one too many times. It's a sobering sight. For all its efficiency, the Yam was not immune to erosion, political, economic, and literal. A broken saddle, a missed harvest, a rebellious village, all could ripple outward, disrupting routes hundreds of miles away. Still, you can almost feel it beneath your feet, the ghost of a system that once worked. A network so finely tuned it could operate without phones, maps, or Wi-Fi, just horses, men, and willpower. And when it ran smoothly, it was unstoppable. You mount up again, heart heavier now. The courier ahead has found the main route again. You follow, reminded that every system, no matter how perfect it seems, is only as strong as the people who keep it alive. But for now, the hoofbeats continue. The records are logged, the hay is dry, and somewhere far ahead, another message is already waiting to be carried. The sun is setting now, dipping low in gold behind the flat line of the earth. The shadows stretch long. The wind softens. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the courier through another bend in the road, this one flanked by bare trees and drifting snow. Snow. Not the decorative kind, no Instagram-ready flakes here. This is Mongolian winter snow, the kind that bites, blinds, and swallows roads whole. And the yum. It kept riding. Mainstream fact, the Mongol postal system operated year-round, through all seasons, including brutal winters and searing summers. Riders weren't dismissed due to weather, they were simply expected to adapt. No delays, no cancellations. If the Khan sent an order in January, it was going to arrive in January, even if the road was covered in ice and your horse had frost on its eyelashes. You trudge beside the courier now, hoofprints already filling with snow behind you. The sky is a pale sheet. Visibility, not great. The road disappeared, but the courier moves as if he knows it by memory. He probably does. Some stations prepared for this. They stored heavy winter cloaks, iron shoe spikes for horses, extra feed, and thicker tenting materials. But not all posts had equal preparation. Some were buried. Others had to be dug out, or simply guessed at. It's about 300 paces past the big bent pine tree kind of guessing. Your quirky tidbit. In extreme weather, some messages were tied to dogs, not horses. It wasn't widespread, but certain mountain or forest stations, especially near the Siberian frontier, reportedly trained large dogs to assist in message delivery when the trails became impassable by hoof. So yes, in a sense, the Mongol Empire had snow dogs before the Yukon did. You squint ahead. The courier's horse is struggling now, belly deep in drifts. He dismounts, leads it forward by the bridle, one careful step at a time. You wonder how many couriers got lost like this, how many messages froze in the snow, never reaching their end. Historians still argue over how effective the yam was in severe winter conditions. Some accounts praise the riders as unstoppable. Others suggest whole regions were effectively cut off for weeks at a time during blizzards. The truth, likely, depends on who you ask and whether their mail arrived. You stumble into a low-slung relay post, its roof barely visible under a foot of snow. Inside, it's dim and warm, lit by a clay hearth that smells like wet wool and boiled onions. A pot simmers quietly. The station master looks up with tired eyes and gestures to a pile of thick blankets. The courier sheds his icy cloak. Steam rises from his sleeves. He nods at the station staff and steps aside for a moment, just long enough to drink something dark from a carved wooden bowl. Then he's back on his feet. You try to linger. Stay. Warm your hands. But the journey's not over. Not in this empire. The hooves must keep pounding, even if your nose freezes off in the process. Outside again, you ride through the thick white world, where sound is muffled and movement feels like wading through a dream. The road is gone, but the courier keeps moving, always forward, and then it happens. A storm. It comes without warning, just a sharp wind and then a wall of snow. Horizontal and blinding. Visibility drops to nothing. You can't see the horse ahead or the road behind. You call out just once, but the wind rips the sound from your throat and flings it backward. Everything is white. You hunker down beside a low hill, finding shelter behind a boulder. The courier's done the same. You can barely make out his shape, but he's crouched beneath a waxed canvas, shielding the saddlebag with his body. Not himself. The bag, because the message must arrive, even if the rider doesn't. That's how seriously they took it. When the wind dies and the snow begins to settle, you rise. You're soaked through. Cold. But the sky is clearing, stars winking out behind ragged clouds. The trail has returned. You see the courier already remounting. No words are spoken, just hoofprints resuming their rhythm. The Mongols didn't stop for storms. They rode through them. They planned for them. The Yam endured not because of luck or technology, but because of stubborn, snow-caked resolve. And tonight, you rode alongside it. The storm is behind you now, but it left its fingerprints all over the land. The trees are shivering, even without wind. The ground is pocked with slush and ice, and the horses move with the cautious rhythm of animals who've learned the hard way not to trust the surface beneath them. But you ride on, following the courier towards something different. Not another lonely outpost. Not a windswept ridge or a frostbitten pass, but a city. Not just any city. This one's loud. Colorful. Busy in the way a too small kitchen gets during a family reunion. Markets hum. Silk flaps from wooden stalls. Bells clink. And unfamiliar languages crash together like soup ingredients you didn't mean to mix, but kind of like anyway. You've reached a hub. And within this tangled knot of trade routes and tea cellars stands a strange man with curly hair and a journal. He's wide-eyed, sunburnt, and entirely too overdressed for the climate. Marco Polo has entered the chat. Mainstream fact: Marco Polo and other European travelers like him experienced the yam system firsthand while journeying through the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries. Polo, in particular, praised the postal network in his writings. describing it as astonishingly fast, well organized, and unlike anything in Europe at the time. And let's be real, Europe was still figuring out how to keep horses alive over winter without accidentally setting the barn on fire. Meanwhile, the Mongols were running a transcontinental postal service with checkpoint lodges and snack options. You trail Polo, now he's asking questions, jotting notes, maybe wondering if anyone would believe him back in Venice. Mongol couriers pass him like ghosts, barely noticing the foreigner gawking at their efficiency. Here's your quirky tidbit according to some accounts. Marco Polo was so impressed with the yam that he tried to copy parts of it into his own family's trading ventures once back in Europe. Like a medieval intern stealing the office workflow spreadsheet. But not every traveler saw the yam as a marvel. Some feared it. You pass a group of merchants from the Persian Gulf, huddled around a campfire, whispering nervously about these silent riders. Apparently, word spreads fast when couriers ride even faster. Tales circulated of messages traveling farther than horses should be able to ride in a day. Some began to suspect sorcery, or demons, or, in one particularly entertaining rumor, teleporting ghosts with saddlebags. Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated for effect or reflect a genuine sense of awe and unease. When you're used to donkeys delivering news 3 weeks late and someone gallops in with updated troop positions overnight, yeah, you'd be suspicious too. And the couriers? They didn't care. They kept moving. They had no time for flattery or fear. Their job wasn't to impress Marco Polo or scare spice traders. It was to deliver the message. You visit the local yam station here. It's bigger, made of stone instead of wood and felt, with arched gates and actual storage rooms. There's a clerk at a desk taking notes in 3 scripts, a stablemaster barking orders, a wall covered in pinned scrolls with ink drying in the breeze. This station serves 100 riders a day, and it smells better than you'd expect. You see more than just Mongols here, Chinese riders, Persian interpreters, even a few Russian scribes copying a map with charcoal fingers. The yam didn't just carry messages, it carried people, cultures, languages. It bridged the empire. You step outside again, blinking against the sun. Polo is still talking, waving his arms at a wide-eyed local. You don't catch what he says, but you know the message. It's one of admiration, disbelief, and maybe a little jealousy. Because what you've just seen, it doesn't exist back home. Not yet. You ride again, past the city's edge, past Polo's lingering stare, past the noise and the colors and the paper pushers trying to make sense of it all. You're back on the road now, and everything feels quieter. Except for the hoofbeats. Of course, they never stop. The sky has gone soft again, its bright edge dimming into the gray-blue of twilight. You're riding slower now, not because the path is harder, but because it's almost over. Not the story, just the road. The courier ahead has stopped looking forward. Now he looks back, every few paces, like he's measuring what was lost along the way. You're entering ghost country. The wind picks up not cruel this time. Just tired. You pass another urtu, or what used to be one. The beams have collapsed in on themselves like sleeping giants. The post has no roof. A tangle of dead vines claws across the stone threshold. Inside, broken bowls. Horse bones. Maybe. A rusted medallion half buried in the earth. The yam is dying. Mainstream fact by the late 14th century. The yam system was no longer what it once was. The Mongol Empire had splintered civil wars, rebellion, the rise of new dynasties. The Golden Horde lost its grip on Russia. The Yuan dynasty fell to the Ming, and without centralized power, the arteries began to clog. You keep writing. Another abandoned station. Then another. They're spaced just like before every 25 or 30 miles, but they're silent now. No smoke, no shouting, just wind and cracked timber and the soft hush of snow drifting through roofless rooms. And here's your quirky, slightly tragic tidbit. Some stations remained active long after the yam collapsed, used by locals as barns, or squatter camps, or simply shelters for travelers who didn't know what they were standing in. History faded into utility. A courier's bunk became a shepherd's straw bed. Some historians argue that the decline of the yam marks the true end of the Mongol Empire more than any lost battle or overthrown city. Because the yam was the thing that held it all together. And when that web of riders snapped, the empire didn't explode. It just sagged, like a tent without poles. You stop beside a dry well, leaning down to brush aside dirt from a stone marker. There's writing here, but you can't read it. Mongol script? Maybe Uyghur. The message lost not just to distance, but to time. And suddenly you feel it. The quiet. Not peaceful, but empty. As if all those hoofbeats, thousands upon thousands, have finally gone silent. Like the land itself is wondering where they went. The courier ahead dismounts. He removes his satchel slowly, gently. There's no next post. No more horses waiting. He looks around. This station will not be revived. He knows that. So do you. He kneels and buries the message. Not because he failed, but because there's no one left to read it. You step back. The grass sways. The path behind you is long, winding, full of echoes. The path ahead, still open, still waiting. But something is different now. The yam no longer gallops. It lingers in bones, in beams, in old medallions hanging from market stalls, sold by men who don't know or care what they were once for. But you know, you've seen it. You've ridden its spine. You've followed the hoofprints and eaten the goat stew and nearly frozen in a snowstorm just to see a message passed from one hand to another before disappearing into the dawn. And now, the ride is over. So you sit down now, just beside the empty road. The stars above are quiet tonight. No storms, no firelight, no messengers racing toward the edge of the world. Just the hush of dry grass, shifting gently in the night air. You let the weight of the story settle into your chest. The riders are gone. The stations are quiet. The empire is dust. But somewhere beneath your feet, the trail still hums faintly, like a long-lost frequency. You close your eyes and you can almost hear it. The thud of hooves, the creak of a saddle, the wind curling through the seams of a waxed canvas satchel. That rhythm hasn't vanished. Not really. It just moved inward. You feel it now, in your heartbeat, in your breath. Slow, steady, like a message riding through you, like a story that never quite ends, even when the road does. So take one last breath, long and warm. Let the silence wrap around your shoulders like a thick winter cloak. The hooves have stopped. The message has arrived. And you brave rider, you've